September 8th, 1945. Hiroshima. The victors arrived, not with bayonets, but with bandages. They came into an atomic desert, a flattened wound still radiating heat in a strange metallic silence. The survivors, the Hibakusha, watched from the shadows of skeletal ruins. They waited. They watched. They expected justice. A terrible, righteous justice for the sky that had split open and rained down fire. Revenge. It was the only word that made sense. They were enemies. Mortal enemies. 17-year-old Akiko Sato, her back a tapestry of keloid scars, saw the American jeeps roll past the skeletal remains of the Aioi Bridge. She expected them to carry guns. They carried medical chests. The whispers started then. Rumors carried on the radioactive wind that still gusted through the city's corpse. Someone said the Americans were here to finish the job, to study them like insects under a lens, a final cruel experiment on the subjects of their terrible new weapon. Nobody knew, but rumors existed. Rumors always existed. Maybe the stories were true. Maybe this was a new kind of warfare, a psychological torture. But then came the paradox. Crates stamped with a white star, unloaded by uniformed men who offered not threats, but cigarettes and tins of food. Then came the doctors. So many doctors. They established the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, the ABCC. A joint Japanese-American effort, they said. Its stated mission, research. The official documents were sterile. Project F, the folder was called. The report stated objectives. Long-term medical follow-up of atomic bomb survivors. It said nothing of guilt, nothing of atonement, and certainly nothing of revenge. Why? Why study the victims you created? Why bring penicillin to a city you had condemned? The logic was broken, the motive invisible. For every survivor whose radiation sickness was documented, another received life-saving blood plasma. For every tissue sample taken, a clinic was built. The Americans were both scientists and saviors, observers and builders. A mission of mercy, or the world's most elaborate laboratory? The truth was buried deeper than the rubble of the Genbaku Dome. It was a story told not in official communiques, but in the bewildered diaries of survivors, in the conflicted notes of American doctors, and in the quiet, astonishing transformation of a people braced for a final blow that never came. They expected an eye for an eye. They found something far more complicated. Something that looked impossibly like help. August 6th, 1945, Hiroshima Prefecture. A second sun was born over the city. It was not the gentle, rising sun of the empire. This one was a brilliant, silent, searing white. A pika, they would later call it. A flash. It lasted less than a second. In that second, the world was bleached of all color. Shadows of men, of ladders, of bridge railings were burned permanently into stone and asphalt. Instantly. Then the world ended. The sound came next, a dawn. Not a boom, but a physical tearing of the universe, a colossal crushing pressure that expanded outwards, moving faster than sound itself. It flattened the city, 70% of its buildings. Gone. 70%. That's almost everything. Temples, houses, shops, factories, fire stations, hospitals, all of it. Wiped from the earth in a concussive wave of unimaginable force. Otagawa, Motoyasu, Tenma, Kyobeshi. The rivers remained, but the bridges connecting them were twisted steel skeletons or simply gone. 70,000 people. That's the initial number. A guess, a whisper. 70,000. That's the entire population of a city like Pasadena, California. Vanished in the time it takes to blink. They were vaporized, they were crushed, they were incinerated. They simply ceased to be. In the city's center, near the hypocenter above the Shima Surgical Clinic, the heat reached 4,000 degrees Celsius. Hotter than the surface of the sun, they knew. People became shadows, nothing more. Akira Tanaka, a 22-year-old clerk at the Gaibi Bank, was lucky. He was inside the vault. The light did not touch him. The pressure wave shook the concrete box like a child's toy. Then, silence. A profound, ringing silence that was more terrifying than the noise it replaced. He waited. 10 minutes. 20. When he pushed the heavy door open, he did not recognize his world. The sky was dark, purple, and boiling. The bank was gone. The street was gone. Only rubble, fire, and the dead remained, and the dying. Above it all, a flower bloomed, a monstrous, obscene column of smoke, dirt, and incinerated life climbing into the stratosphere. It rose higher and higher and higher. A mushroom cloud. That's what the Americans would call it. The people on the ground had no name for it. They stared at the churning, growing pillar that blotted out the real sun. It was a god, a demon. It was a thing for which no words existed. They just stared. Numb. The city's infrastructure had collapsed. Utterly. The power grid vaporized. Water mains shattered. The tram lines on Ahoy Street were a mangled wreck. The streetcars themselves blackened. Burned out husks filled with charred remains. The 2nd General Army headquarters, located in the ancient Hiroshima castle, had been obliterated. Command and control did not exist. There was no one to give orders, no one to receive them. Every emergency service, every government function, every shred of organized society erased. And then the rain began. It was not clean. It was not water. It was a thick, black, greasy rain. Large, sticky drops that stained everything they touched. It was the bomb's own fallout. Dust, soot, and intensely radioactive particles sucked up into the firestorm and now falling back to Earth. The survivors, their skin burned, their throats parched from dust and screaming, looked up at the sky. They opened their mouths to the black rain. They thought it was a miracle. A blessing to quench an impossible thirst. They were drinking poison. Pure poison. The few hospitals still standing were overwhelmed. The Red Cross Hospital, its structure damaged but intact, became a focal point of human misery. Doctors and nurses were among the dead and wounded. The survivors brought their loved ones or strangers, or just themselves. They flooded the hallways, the courtyards, the very streets outside. There were no beds, no plasma, not enough bandages, not enough morphine, not enough hands. Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, himself injured, later wrote of a world that had become a living hell. Burns, lacerations, exposed bone, glass shards embedded in flesh, peeling skin, and a strange new sickness, a sickness with no name. They walked, thousands of them, a silent, shuffling procession of ghosts. They held their arms out in front of them, the skin hanging from their fingertips in grotesque ribbons. They were burned, naked, and bleeding. But they made no sound, not a cry, not a moan. Just the shuffling of feet through the debris. A line of specters moving from the city's burning heart toward the hills. They were called the ant-walking parades. A whole population traumatized into silence. The psychological devastation was as absolute as the physical. Nobody knew what it was. Rumors spread through the dazed survivors. Maybe a Molotov flower basket, a cluster of conventional bombs. Someone whispered it was a magnesium powder scattered from the sky. The military police tried to restore order, but they were just as lost. Their reports were useless, contradictory, a new type of bomb. That was all they knew, a single bomb, one bomb. As dusk fell on August 6th, the city was a furnace. Hundreds of fires, ignited by the heat flash and fed by the shattered wooden homes, had merged into a single massive firestorm. It lit the dark sky with a hellish red glow. The air was thick with the smell of burning and death. In the rubble by the rivers, in the hills, the survivors huddled. They were dazed, injured, and utterly alone. They did not know the Americans were the enemy who did this. They did not know it was an atomic weapon. They did not know that a city named Nagasaki would share their fate in 3 days. They knew only fire, thirst, and pain. And a strange, creeping lethargy. A new kind of sickness that had only just begun to claim them. The dying was far from over. August 10th, 1945. Ujina Port, Hiroshima. They waited for the demons. The Oni? That is what the Whispers called them. The long-nosed, blue-eyed demons who had commanded the sun to fall. They would come from the sea, it was said. They would march through the ashes with bayonets fixed. To finish the job. Nobody expected mercy. Mercy was not a currency of war. The radio had promised glorious death, 100 million shattered jewels. It had not promised surrender, it had not promised survival. And it certainly had not promised kindness from the enemy. Kindness was a lie you told children. Here there were no more children, only old-eyed miniature ghosts. The expectation was simple. It was retribution. An eye for an eye, a city for a city. They had bombed Pearl Harbor. The Americans had bombed Hiroshima. The equation was balanced with fire and death. Now came the final calculation. The soldiers, the occupation, the rounding up. Akiko Tanaka, who had been a 19-year-old telegraphy student, knew the protocols of defeat. She had read them in forbidden Western books before the war. The victor takes the spoils. The men are shot or imprisoned. The women... She did not let her mind finish the thought. The thought finished itself anyway. In the makeshift clinic at the Ujina Naval Station, a woman with a face like melted wax whispered it. They will take the women, for their soldiers, for their pleasure. That is what armies do. The whisper spread like a fever. It was a new fear, layered on top of the gnawing terror of the bomb's strange poison. First the flash, the pika, then the blast, the dawn, then the sickness, and now the boots. The sound of foreign boots on Japanese soil. The psychological wound was deeper than any burn. The bomb was not a weapon, it was a judgment. A biblical, terrible judgment that vaporized shadows onto walls and boiled rivers. It was so absolute, so complete in its annihilation, that any follow-up action must also be absolute. The survivors, shuffling through the rubble with their skin hanging in strips, could not conceive of a victor who would wield such power and then offer a bandage. It was illogical. It was a violation of the physics of hatred. You do not extinguish a star and then light a candle for the dead. You extinguish everything, everything. An initial American sociological survey, conducted in secret weeks later, confirmed this. The folder was labeled Subjective Fear Index Hiroshima, a dry title for an encyclopedia of terror. Its preliminary report stated that of the first 100 coherent survivors questioned, 93 expected immediate execution or internment in labor camps. 93. The report noted a recurring phrase, shikata ga nai. It cannot be helped. But it was spoken with a terrifying finality, the acceptance of a man facing a firing squad, not the resignation of a farmer with a failed crop. Fear, anger, and uncertainty, a trinity of emotions that prayed at the altar of ruin. The anger was a cold, hard thing. It was directed at the Americans for their inhuman weapon. It was directed at the Emperor for his silence. It was directed at the sky itself. Kenji Sato, a corporal from the 5th Division, who had been home on medical leave, felt it most. He sat by the ruins of the Aioi Bridge, the Hypo Center, the bullseye. His uniform was gone. His family was gone. His rank meant nothing, but the soldier in him remained. And the soldier knew what to expect from a conquering army. A bullet to the back of the head. Clean, efficient. He had seen his own men do it in Nanking, in Manila, in Singapore. It was the way of a warrior. A warrior does not tend to his enemy's wounds. He salts them. He salts the earth. Rumors multiplied. They came on the wind, carried with the radioactive dust. Someone saw a periscope in the bay. Someone else heard the drone of a low-flying American plane, a spotter plane. They are counting the dead, one man cackled, his lips cracked and bleeding. They want to see their good work. They are counting us. to see how many bullets they need. Akiko Tanaka hid her younger sister, 7-year-old Emi, in the cellar of a destroyed sake warehouse. Emi had been shielded by a concrete wall. She was unmarked, a perfect porcelain doll in a world of broken pottery. Akiko was not. The left side of her face and neck bore the intricate, raised pattern of her kimono, a keloid scar, a permanent photograph of the atomic light. She was marked, branded. She would be easy to find. She told Emi to stay silent, no matter what sound she heard. No matter who called her name, no matter what. Then came the new sound. It was not the shuffling of survivors. It was not the wind. It was a machine. A low, guttural growl that was not the sound of any Japanese truck. It came from the west, from the direction of the mountains. A cloud of dust rose over the skeletal remains of the commercial district. It grew larger. The sound grew louder, grinding, powerful, unfamiliar. Kenji Sato, the soldier, stood up. His training took over. Identify the threat. He squinted his eyes, his vision still blurry, dotted with black floaters. Down in the Ujina clinic, the whispers stopped. The groans faded. Everyone who could move crawled toward the shattered windows, peering out. In the sake cellar, Akiko held her breath, pressing Emi's face into her shoulder. The sound was closer now. A shape resolved itself from the dust cloud. It was a vehicle. Low, square, and open-topped. It was painted a dull, lifeless green, olive drab, the color of the American Army. It bounced over the rubble, its progress slow but relentless. 2 figures were inside, 2 demons wearing helmets shaped like soup bowls. They were here. It was beginning, just as they had all expected. And then the main thing started. August 15th, 1945. Kure Naval Base, Hiroshima Prefecture. The war was over, the mission was not. This was the part nobody understood. The men of the 6th Army, the veterans of New Guinea and the Philippines, thought their work was done. They had fought. They had won. Now they would go home. That is what they thought. They were wrong. Terribly wrong. A new directive arrived, not by messenger, but by a crackling, high-priority telex from Manila. From MacArthur's headquarters. It was not an order for occupation, not in the way they knew. There were no instructions for curfews, for disarmament of holdouts, for rooting out the Kempi-Tai. The words were strange, alien. Bulldozers, medical supplies, water purification units, civilian affairs specialists. The list went on. Lumber, steel pipe, electrical wire, canvas tents. Enough to build a small American city. The directive was for Hiroshima, for the void. It made no sense. None at all. Major General Robert B. McClure, commander of the 41st Infantry Division, read the orders. He read them 3 times. His division, the Sunset Division, was an assault force. They were trained to take ground, not to build on it. To kill, not to heal. But the orders were clear. The 41st Infantry was to enter Hiroshima. Its primary mission, establish a functioning civil authority. Provide emergency relief. Begin reconstruction. Begin immediately. Not to conquer, to build. The first units moved in. Not with rifles at the ready, but with shovels in their hands, the men of the 116th Engineer Combat Battalion. They had built Bailey bridges under fire in Luzon. Now they were told to clear streets of ghosts and debris, to map a city that no longer existed on any map. They were followed by the 41st Quartermaster Company. They brought food, they brought water, 10,000 gallons of clean water a day. For the enemy. The rumors started. Whispers in the chow line. Scuttlebutt in the temporary barracks. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how you ended a war. You don't rebuild the city, you just obliterated. Not like this. Not this fast. Someone said the plan was old, predating the bomb itself, a contingency inside a contingency. A folder deep in a file cabinet in the Pentagon, marked only with a code. Maybe Then the ships came, not the gray hulls of destroyers and cruisers. White ships. Pristine white ships with massive red crosses painted on their sides. The USS Benevolence, the USS Mercy. Hospital ships. They anchored in the bay, their lights a beacon in the absolute darkness of the coastline. And with them came others. A Swiss delegate from the International Committee of the Red Cross, a man named Dr. Marcel Junod, arrived with 12 tons of medical aid. 12 tons. That's the weight of 2 elephants. 12 tons of plasma, sulfa drugs, and bandages for the city that had been the target. The Americans didn't turn him away. They escorted him in. They gave him a jeep and a driver. They worked with him. This was the part that baffled the Japanese. The demons, the Oni, had 2 faces. One was a searing white light, the other was a medic's armband. They watched as American infantrymen, boys from Iowa and Texas, set up aid stations. They watched as U.S. Navy Seabees, tough construction men, labored to restore a single water pump in the Eugenia district. They were methodical, tireless, almost inhuman in their efficiency. McClure's men began the impossible task of governance. They found what was left of the Hiroshima prefectural government. They found Mayor Senkichi Owaya's successor, Shiche Hamae. They found 20 surviving police officers. 20. For a city that once had over 1,000. 20 men to police a wasteland of 250,000 souls, living and dead. The Americans didn't give them orders. They gave them armbands, rations, and a headquarters. A tent. That's how it began. Then the money appeared. Military scrip was converted into yen, stacks of it. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began hiring civilians, paying them, paying the citizens of Hiroshima to clear the rubble of their own homes, to unload American supplies, to dig mass graves, a day's wage for a day's work. The occupiers were creating an economy of survival, an economy of reconstruction, food for work, yen for rubble, order from chaos. Suzuki, Tanaka, Yamamoto, Sato, Ito, Watanabe. Names on a payroll ledger kept by a 20-year-old corporal from Cleveland. It was a mission of reconstruction. It was a mission of mercy. Everyone could see that. But there was something else. A coldness to the precision. The teams didn't just clear rubble, they photographed it. They surveyed it. They took samples. The medics didn't just treat burns, they documented every single one. Location, severity, distance from the hypocenter. Every life saved was a data point. Every structure cleared was an exhibit. The entire operation felt rehearsed. It was too organized for a spontaneous act of humanity. The coordination between the Army, the Navy, and international bodies like the Red Cross was seamless. Too seamless. The folder had a name. They whispered it in the intelligence section. The folder was called Project Phoenix, but it wasn't about the city rising from the ashes, not really. The Americans were studying their creation. They had turned Hiroshima into the world's largest laboratory. The people were the test subjects. The reconstruction was the experiment. Every action, every bag of rice, every bandage was a carefully measured input. They were observing the effects of the bomb and the effects of the cure. And the reports, the real reports, weren't going to General McClure or even to MacArthur. They were going somewhere else entirely. November 7th, 1945. Washington, D.C. They were not soldiers, not in the traditional sense. Their orders came not from MacArthur, but from the National Academy of Sciences, a new kind of army. An army of white coats and clipboards, doctors, geneticists, hematologists, pathologists. Their mission was codified in a folder stamped Top Secret. The folder was called the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, ABCC, a clean, sterile name for a messy, irradiated world. The man chosen to lead was Colonel Elias Vance, MD, a pathologist, 52 years old. Vance had not seen combat. He had seen its results under a microscope. Cells. Twisted, broken, dying cells. He had worked on a periphery of the Manhattan Project, studying the effects of plutonium on tissue. He was a man of data, of facts. Human suffering was a variable, not an endpoint. The report he co-authored stated, the Japanese population of Hiroshima and Nagasaki affords an unprecedented opportunity for the study of the acute and chronic effects of nuclear radiation. An opportunity. That was the word they used. They arrived in Hiroshima in the winter. A cold, damp wind blew from the Oda River carrying the smell of ash and disinfectant. They did not come empty-handed. They brought crates of centrifuges, microscopes, X-ray machines, sterile needles, glass vials. They took over the old Red Cross hospital on Hijiyama Hill, a building scarred but still standing, overlooking the flattened heart of the city. Wires were run. Generators hummed. Electric lights burned in every room, even at dawn, especially at dawn. The locals watched. They were ghosts in their own city. The rumors started. The Americans were here to heal, to cure the picadon sickness, the strange disease that made your hair fall out, your gums bleed, your skin erupt in purple spots. Hope was a desperate, tenacious weed. It grew in the rubble. They called the newcomers the Picadon Isha, the flashbang doctors, and then the main thing started. It was not healing, it was study. A vast living laboratory. The ABCC staff, hundreds of them, fanned out. They created a map. Not of streets, but of suffering. Charts covered the walls, concentric circles radiating from the hypocenter, the Shima Hospital. Red for lethal exposure, 1,000 meters, yellow for severe, 2,000 meters, green for moderate. A precise cartography of death. Every survivor was a point on this map, a coordinate in a grand experiment. They were given numbers, not names, numbers. They were brought to the clinic on Hijiyama Hill. Their clothes were taken. They were given a paper gown. They were weighed, measured, photographed. They were subjects. Subject 731, Subject 1042, Subject 2E501. The examinations were exhaustive, methodical, cold. They measured the keloids, the hideous raised scars that grew like angry vines over burned skin. They photographed the cataracts, the cloudy films that were blinding children. They charted the hair loss, the miscarriages, the birth defects. Schneider, Becker, Wagner, Kaufman, Kleine, Gross. The American doctors worked in shifts. They did not smile, they took blood. Always the blood. From the old, from the young, from the pregnant, from the dying. They drew it into vials, labeled them with the numbers, spun them in the new centrifuges. Some of the plasma was studied on site, but most of it, the most important samples, were packed in dry ice. Flown from Iwakuni Airfield, flown to laboratories in America, the data traveled 10,000 kilometers. The person it came from was given a small bandage and sent back into the ruins. There was no treatment, not for this. They offered aspirin. For the fevers. They offered sulfa drugs. For the infections that festered in a world without sanitation. But for the radiation, the poison in the marrow of their bones, there was nothing. The Americans did not offer a cure. They did not even try. They were studying a disease they could not or would not treat. A paradox. A terrible, quiet paradox. The whispers changed. The gratitude curdled into something else. Fear, resentment, a profound sense of violation. They are collecting us, a woman said at the Ujina fish market. Like butterflies. Her neighbor nodded, her face a mask of grief. My son, they took his blood 3 times. He is weaker now, but they have his blood. Etsuko Tanaka was 28. Her son Kenji was 6. They had been in their wooden house, 1,600 meters from the hypocenter. The house was gone. Her husband was gone. But they had survived. Or so she thought. Now Kenji was always tired. He had bruises that would not fade. A doctor from the ABCC, a kind-faced man named Peterson, had found them. He insisted they come to the clinic, for Kenji. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of alcohol. Another doctor, a senior man, joined them. It was Vance. He looked at Kenji's chart. He looked at the boy's pale skin. His eyes were not kind. They were bright, sharp. The eyes of a man who has found something rare. Acute lymphocytic leukemia, he said to Peterson, his voice low. Incidence rate is astounding, a perfect longitudinal study. Etsuko did not understand the English words. Leukocyte counts, blast cells, chromosomal aberrations. It was a language from another world. She watched them draw a vial of blood from her son's thin arm. Kenji did not cry. He had learned not to cry. He just stared at the ceiling. She saw the American doctors look at the vial, holding it up to the light. The dark red fluid. Her son's life. They looked at it with a fascination that terrified her. The examination finished. Dr. Peterson smiled and gave Kenji a small, foil-wrapped square. Chocolate. From America. The boy took it, his fingers clumsy. Etsuko looked at the chocolate in her son's hand, then at the small red needle mark on his arm. A transaction. She clutched his hand. The relief was gone. In its place, a cold, clean terror. The terror of a specimen in a jar, perfectly preserved and utterly alone. September 2nd, 1945, Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital. The dying did not stop. It was the one constant in a shattered world. The bombs had fallen, the emperor had spoken, the Americans had landed. But the dying continued, silent and inexorable. The doctors had failed. They knew it, every single one of them. A failure of medicine, a failure of science, a failure of the human body itself against this new, invisible fire. The hospital was a fortress of pale concrete that had somehow withstood the fist of the atom. Outside, a wasteland. Inside, a charnel house. Dr. Terafumi Sasaki, just 25 years old, had not slept in weeks. Not real sleep. He moved through the corridors, a ghost in a stained white coat. The smell clung to him. The smell of burned flesh, of infection, of death. It was a sweet, cloying odor that soap could not wash away. Corridors were not corridors anymore. They were wards. Every inch of floor space held a body. Some moaning, some silent. The living and the dead lay side by side, often indistinguishable until the flies gave them away. Sasaki, Hida, Koyama, Nagai. The names of the doctors were a litany of exhaustion. They had nothing. Nothing. The hospital's pharmacy had been vaporized. The nurses were dead or dying themselves. They had symptoms. 1,000 variations of a disease with no name. First, the nausea. Then, days later, the fever. Then the purple spots on the skin. Petechiae. A word Sasaki had learned in a textbook and never thought he would see. He saw it everywhere now. On the necks of children, the arms of old men, the chests of young women. It meant the blood was breaking down. It meant the end was near. Hair fell out in clumps on the makeshift pillows. Gums bled. Wounds that had been healing would suddenly hemorrhage. They called it the Picadon disease, the flashboom disease. It was a child's name for a devil's work. The doctors did not know. They simply did not know. Was it a poison? A gas? A lingering heat? They whispered theories in the dark. Maybe it was in the water. Maybe in the ash that fell like black snow. Nobody knew. And then help came. Not from Tokyo. Not from the new American masters. It came from a man with a neutral passport. Dr. Marcel Junod of the International Committee of the Red Cross, a Swiss. He arrived in early September, a tall figure stepping through the ruins, his face a mask of professional disbelief. He saw the reality that the reports in Geneva could never convey. He saw the rows of bodies, the overworked doctors, the absolute void of resources. He saw Dr. Sasaki, his eyes hollow, pointing to a patient. "We give them injections of saline, sometimes vitamins," Sasaki had said. "It is all we have. It does nothing." Nothing. Junod had not come empty-handed. His report, filed later under the designation Hiroshima 01, was cold and precise. It detailed the arrival of his cargo. 16 tons of medical supplies requisitioned from American military stockpiles. 16 tons. It sounded like a miracle. It was a mountain of crates unloaded at Ujina port. A mountain of hope. Penicillin, sulfadiazine, plasma, blood transfusion kits, bandages, iodine, surgical tools, anesthetics. Everything the doctors had dreamed of. Everything. The crates were opened in the hospital courtyard, the American marking stark against the gray dust. For a day there was a sense of victory, a sense that the tide could be turned. It was a false dawn. The supplies were a single drop of rain on a burning forest. They could treat the infections. They could clean the burns. They could ease the pain of those wounded by glass and timber. But they could not touch the ghost. The ghost was inside the marrow. The ghost was rewriting the very essence of their blood. A Swiss delegate who came with Unod, a man named Friedrich Beery, kept a sketchbook. He was not a doctor. He drew what he saw. One sketch shows a Red Cross nurse, her face a smudge of exhaustion and grime, kneeling on the floor of what was once a school gymnasium. She is not wrapping a burn. She is holding a small bowl to the lips of a young boy whose hair is gone. His eyes are wide, staring at nothing. The caption, written in neat German script, reads, Wasser, will nur Wasser. Water. He only wants water. Another sketch depicts a line of people outside the hospital, not waiting for treatment but to give blood. A desperate, futile attempt to replace what the radiation had stolen. Their own bodies were already failing. The collaboration was a strange, tense affair. The Swiss Red Cross brokered the aid. The American military provided it. The Japanese doctors administered it. 3 hands, all trying to mend a vessel that was disintegrating from within. Rumors festered in the makeshift wards. The Americans had a cure, they whispered, but were withholding it. The Americans were only here to study them like insects under a lens. The Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission had arrived. Their doctors carried clipboards, not stethoscopes. They took samples. Blood, tissue, everything. They documented the decay with scientific precision. A report from a Lieutenant Colonel Ashley Alderson to General MacArthur was blunt. The effects are of a character and magnitude never before experienced. An unparalleled opportunity for study presents itself. Opportunity. That was the word he used. Opportunity. The dying did not stop. It simply became more organized. The international teams brought order, they brought supplies, but they also brought a new kind of coldness. The Japanese doctors like Shigeto and Sasaki fought for each life, a personal, desperate battle. The foreign observers recorded the losses. It was a collaboration of desperation and observation. In a locked file cabinet at the ABCC headquarters, a folder was started. It was titled Primary Effects, Hematological Study Group A. It contained charts, temperature, white blood cell counts, platelet levels. Names were replaced with numbers. Tanaka, Suzuki, Watanabe, Yamamoto, Kobayashi, Ito. They became points on a downward sloping curve, a curve that always ended at 0. Dr. Sasaki stopped keeping a detailed diary. There was no time. But one night, late in November, as the first cold wind of winter rattled the broken window frames of his small office, he wrote a single line on a scrap of paper. He had just watched a mother of 3 die, not from her burns, which were almost healed, but from a sudden, unstoppable bleed from her nose. The paper was from a box of American bandages. On the back, in faint pencil, he wrote, "We are not fighting a sickness." He paused, the pencil lead breaking. "We are fighting the atom itself." And the atom was patient. The atom was eternal. September 2nd, 1945. Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital. The dying did not stop. It was the one constant in a shattered world. The bombs had fallen, the emperor had spoken, the Americans had come. But the dying continued. Silently. Inexplicably. Etsuko Tanaka, 17 years old, watched it happen. She had survived the flash, the blast, the fire. She thought she had survived everything. She was wrong. The real war was just beginning, a war inside her own body. They whispered of the Pica don Bio, the atomic bomb disease. It had no rules. It took the strong and spared the weak. It came with purple spots on the skin, with hair falling out in clumps, with a fever that burned from the inside out. Etsuko saw her friend, Sachiko, die this way. One day she was talking about the future. The next, she was gone. A statistic. Etsuko looked in the mirror. She waited. Every morning she checked her hairbrush. Every evening she checked her skin. Waiting. The waiting was its own kind of hell. This was the first legacy. Fear. A deep cellular fear that settled into the bone marrow. Then the Americans came again. Not the soldiers in jeeps, different men. Men in white coats with clipboards, white. They set up their headquarters on Hijiyama Hill, overlooking the ruins. A pristine white building that seemed to mock the gray devastation below. The ABCC, the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. They said they were there to study, not to treat. Study. That word echoed in the empty spaces of the city. Study. The survivors became Hibakusha, the bomb-affected people. A new caste was born. You were marked. Not just by the keloid scars that twisted skin into grotesque maps of pain, the thick, red, angry welts that never faded. You were marked by a number. The ABCC gave everyone a number. They called it the master file. A number for every survivor. A number for their children. Etsuko Tanaka was now number 24701. She was no longer a person. She was a data point. The examinations were methodical, cold, humiliating. They measured skulls, recorded weights, drew blood, collected urine, x-rayed chests. They asked questions. The questions were always the same. Where were you on August 6th? How far from the hypocenter? What were you doing? Were you shielded? Did you see the flash? Did you feel the heat? Question after question. They wrote everything down on their forms. In English. They never told you the results. They never offered a cure. They just watched and wrote and watched. Gratitude was a complicated poison. Some survivors were thankful. The Americans provided food sometimes. They provided work, cleaning up the ABCC building. A job was a miracle. But the gratitude was sour. It tasted like ashes. They were receiving charity from the architects of their apocalypse. They were being studied like insects pinned to a board by the very people who had sprayed the poison. Victims, and now subjects. A legacy of impossible contradictions. Then came the other fear, the social death. Rumors spread like radiation, invisible, deadly. The newspapers were silent, but the whispers were everywhere. In the markets, in the bathhouses, on the ferries. Was the bomb disease contagious? Could you catch it from a touch, a breath? Hibakusha were avoided. Neighbors crossed the street. Old friends stopped visiting. The stigma was a second bomb, a silent one, that detonated in whispers, in sideways glances, in broken engagements. Kenji Sato, a 40-year-old shopkeeper who had lost his wife in his store, found he could not find a new wife. No family would offer their daughter. Who would marry a man whose blood might be tainted? Who would risk having children with monstrous deformities? The Hibakusha curse. It was passed down. It was a genetic stain. A mark of Cain burned into the DNA. Etsuko Tanaka's arranged marriage meeting was a disaster. The matchmaker saw the faint scars on her neck. The questions started. The family of the groom was polite. Terribly polite. They never called back. The city rose from the dead. New buildings of concrete and steel went up. Trams ran again. Shops opened. A new, modern Hiroshima was being born, a symbol of resilience, a testament to the human spirit. That's what the officials said, the politicians, the Americans. But for the Hibakusha, the new city was a haunted house. Every new bridge was built over ghosts. Every new park grew on soil mixed with the ashes of thousands. They saw the new Hiroshima, the clean Hiroshima, the Hiroshima Peace Memorial City. But they lived in a different place, a place of memory, a place of loss. They were artifacts in their own living museum. The scientists from the ABCC would nod, looking at the bustling streets. Remarkable recovery. Remarkable. Then they would go back to their clinic on the hill, back to their files, back to their numbers. 24701, 31952, 18244, Tanaka, Sato, Nakamura, Ito, Kobayashi, Kato. They were charting the half-life of human suffering. They were not doctors, they were physicists of the soul, and the real study, the one that truly mattered, had not even begun. It was not about the survivors, it was about their children, and their children's children. The first generation was the test, the children were the results, and the Americans were watching, waiting. The file was open. It would never be closed. August 14th, 1945, the Imperial Palace, Tokyo. The air in the bunker was stale, stale with the smell of sweat, of fear, of an empire's end. 6 men sat around a table, the Supreme War Council, the Big Six. 3 wanted to fight. General Anami, the war minister, he spoke of honor. He spoke of the final glorious battle on the homeland's soil. Ketsugo, 1 million soldiers, 10 million civilians armed with bamboo spears. A beautiful death for 100 million. 3 wanted to stop. The deadlock was absolute. It had been like this for days, for weeks. Then came the messages. First from a city called Hiroshima, a single bomb, a city erased. Then from a city called Nagasaki, a second bomb, a second erasure. In between, on August 9th, another message. From the north, the Red Army was pouring into Manchuria. 1,500,000 Soviet soldiers. The Kwantung Army, once the pride of the empire, crumbled like dust. 1 bomb might be an anomaly, a fluke of science. 2 bombs were a production line. The emperor listened. Hirohito, the living god. He had not spoken in a meeting like this, not ever. The whispers said he broke protocol, he broke tradition, he broke the silence. The minutes, declassified decades later, were sterile. They did not capture the tremor in his voice. They did not capture the tears on the faces of old generals. We must bear the unbearable, he said. The war was over, but the story of the bomb, that was just beginning. It started as a target, Target 303. That was Hiroshima's designation in a folder on a desk in the Pentagon. A city chosen for its shape, for its military depots, for its untouched condition. A perfect laboratory. The report from General Thomas Farrell to General Leslie Groves was clinical, factual. Results: good. It was a military assessment, an engineer's report on a successful demolition. Nothing more. But facts are never just facts. They leak. They curdle. They become myths. The first photographs were smuggled out, blurry, haunting images of a flattened world under a white sky. Then came the stories, carried by the few who could still walk, still talk. Stories of a silent flash, of black rain, of people who became shadows on a wall. The Pika Dawn. Flash boom. The name given by the children, the name that stuck. Hiroshima ceased to be Target 303. It became something else entirely. A symbol was needed. Washington needed a symbol of its terrible, righteous power. A symbol that ended the most brutal war in history and would hold the Soviets in check. A full stop at the end of a sentence written in blood. A punctuation mark visible from space. Hiroshima was that symbol. A testament to American might. A warning. Tokyo needed a symbol too, but a different one. A symbol of victimhood, of suffering. A way to reframe defeat not as a military failure, but as a martyrdom. A way to wash away the sins of Nanking, of Bataan, of Singapore, in a baptism of atomic fire. Hiroshima was that symbol. A testament to Japanese endurance. A plea. A symbol of power, a symbol of pain, two sides of the same scorched coin, and on the ground in the ruins, they did not care for symbols. They cared for water, for bandages, for finding the dead. But a new idea began to grow there in the radioactive soil, an idea championed by a man named Shinzo Hamai, the city's young mayor. He saw the future. He saw beyond the rubble, the resentment, the rage. He did not want a city rebuilt on vengeance. He wanted a city of peace. The first sketches were drawn on scraps of paper, found in an archive at Tokyo University years later. The artist is unknown, maybe a student, maybe a city planner who survived. The charcoal lines are frantic. They show the ghost city, the skeleton of the prefectural industrial promotion hall, its dome exposed to the sky, the twisted steel of the Aioi Bridge. Then, over these ghosts, new lines appear. Clean, hopeful lines. Wide boulevards named Peace Boulevard, parks where there were only ashes, a museum, a cenotaph, a flame. It was a blueprint for memory. A list was made, not of the dead, but for the living. The Peace Memorial Park, designed by the architect Kenzo Tange. The Children's Peace Monument, covered in 1,000,000 paper cranes. The memorial cenotaph, shaped like an ancient tomb, holding the names of the dead. All of them. Japanese, Korean, American prisoners of war. All of them. Underneath an inscription, "Let all the souls here rest in peace, for we shall not repeat the evil." We, not you, we, a collective confession, an audacious act of shared responsibility. The city rose again, concrete, steel, and glass. Brighter, wider, more modern than before. Trams ran down the new boulevards. Department stores opened. People laughed in the parks built over the bones of the dead. A miracle of reconstruction, a testament to human will. But the symbol remained dual. A tourist stands before the A-bomb dome, the skeletal ruin preserved in the heart of the new metropolis. He takes a photograph, an act of witness, an act of tourism. He then walks 100 meters and buys a coffee from a vending machine, a souvenir from a shop. He looks at the vibrant, bustling city, a city like any other. And for a moment, it is possible to forget. But you cannot forget. The dome is there. The museum is there. The shadow is there. It stretches from 1945 into forever. The city was rebuilt. The bomb was not uninvented, and the shadow remained. Can a wound be studied by the hand that inflicted it? The survivors of Hiroshima, expecting retribution, found physicians. They waited for conquerors and were met by scientists, charting the progress of purple spots and fevers that burned from within. The men of the Sixth Army came not with swords, but with clipboards. Their report spoke of an unprecedented opportunity, a new science born from a new kind of death. History became an examination room, humanity a specimen. The line between atonement and experiment was written in invisible ink. This was not a mission of revenge. It was not a mission of simple mercy. It was a mission of terrible, necessary knowledge, built atop a failure of the human body itself. The wide boulevards and memorial parks tell one story. The real story lies somewhere else, between the data points, between the scar tissue and the silence. The questions burned into the earth in August of 1945 remain unanswered. They echo not in the archives, but in the space between the heartbeats of a city that was reborn from its own ashes, forever astonishing and forever a witness. What is the true half-life of a secret?